Great. Welcome, particularly to our speakers, moderators, and the live audience to this webinar, Hashing the Atom, Blockchain Solutions for Global Security. My name is Cindy Vestergaard. I'm the director of the Blockchain and Practice program at the Stimson Center. And I'm really looking forward to these two-day discussions to provide insights on how distributed ledger technology can go beyond enterprise solutions and ecosystems to enhance trust and transparency in nonproliferation and global security. In our first day today, all of the sessions were really focusing on distributed ledger technology, DLT, and pioneering in the nuclear sector. I will be moderating your first session today. Lovely Umayam will be following up starting at 12:45. And tomorrow, for those who will be attending, hopefully you will, the discussion will look at threats and risks in international commerce and using DLT to prevent WMD proliferation. That will be moderated by my colleague, Rick Cupid. And then tomorrow that will end with, we'll actually end the discussions with a roundtable on building trust with distributed ledger technology. A quick note on some logistics. This is being live streamed from WebEx. If you do have questions, please put them into the chat, and I'm sure there will be some more instructions that will pop up on the chat itself. But for right now, we're going to launch into our first session. I have four fabulous speakers who are joining me today. Sarah Fraser is actually going to kick us off. She is Group Leader for Global Security, Technology and Policy at Pacific Northwest National Laboratory. Tapani Honkama will follow her. He is Principal Advisor for Finland's Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority, STUK, followed by two DLT developers that we have, John Geeter, who is Chief Technical Officer at Jistuin, and Michelle Lunny, who is Vice President, Business Development at OARO. Jistuin has offices in the US and in the UK, and OARO has offices in Canada and Spain. So with that, I will actually turn it over to Sarah. If people are interested in more information about the bios, please do find them online. And we'll really look forward to the conversation. Sarah, over to you.
Great, thanks, Cindy. Just a second. Do you see my slides, Cindy? Good, and you can hear me okay?
Yep, everything sounds good and looks good. Thanks, Sarah.
All right. So good morning, everyone. My name is Sarah Fraser from the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, and I'm going to be talking about a very early prototype that we designed a few years ago to help us consider whether DLT, distributed ledger technology, might be deployable for safeguards use. Before I begin, I really have to thank Cindy for this lovely invitation to join all of you today. It's really my privilege to join you and all of the other developers to talk about how DLT might be deployed for non-proliferation use. I also want to recognize my multidisciplinary team of folks listed here who were really instrumental in driving this work forward. Now, when we all came together a few years ago, it wasn't really to make a product for non-proliferation experts to use. That's why I don't have a fancy video or anything to share with you today. Rather, when we first started the research, we knew the technology was likely going to work, and we knew it was going to mature over the years. What we didn't know was whether existing safeguards practices like nuclear material accounting and inspections and the infrastructure supporting that, like inventory change reports and material balance reports, could be incorporated into a distributed ledger in a way that might be acceptable to end users. You know, we were asking the very basic question, could we marry this emerging technology with a very well-established safeguard system? Now, to answer that question, it probably pays to take a little step back and recognize that new and emerging technologies are often introduced into one of two types of legal and policy frameworks. On the one hand, they're the frameworks that involve an absence of laws and policies governing technology use. And in those cases, technology development and acceptance really requires the development of laws and policies. Great example is take your video camera or a drone. We know these technologies work. They're available in the commercial context. But now take your video camera and slap it on a law enforcement officer. All of a sudden, you have a variety of questions that need to be addressed in order to use the technology. Things like, how are you going to store the data? Who's going to have access to the data? How long will people have access to the data? What are the standards of use when using those data that are collected in law enforcement proceedings? Often technologies are deployed into those frameworks too early, and they, well before policies and laws can be developed, and they create deployment challenges. If you want to know what those challenges are, just read the news on any given day, right? In a second type of framework is one where there's a very robust set of laws and policies that are already in place that have to be navigated in order to effectively deploy a technology. In the case of DLT, that latter framework is the one that we're dealing with. It's important to recognize, and this is kind of the key point of the presentation, that the safeguard system is based on a robust set of legal agreements and provisions that are nearly impossible to change, or they're very hard to change. When new technologies are introduced in the commercial space, we're used to seeing national laws and regulations get updated so we could take full advantage of a technology. But in the safeguard system, the IAEA has carefully negotiated hundreds of safeguards agreements with different countries to determine how safeguards will be applied in each state. And these agreements are unlikely to just change without a whole lot of additional negotiation in order to accept a new technology, no matter how compelling the technology is. So we have to find a way through these safeguards agreements in order to deploy the technology. Now, if these provisions are undermined or ignored, the solution you're trying to deploy, no matter how well it functions, is unlikely to be accepted. So let's take a quick look at the guiding principles in this existing safeguard system, which, by the way, are effectively codified in the legal framework. First off, the IAEA has this consistent goal to increase the effectiveness and efficiency of safeguards activities. State cooperation is critical for the IAEA to perform its safeguards mission, but states also expect the IAEA to conduct verification activities in ways that are non-discriminatory and independent and objective, meaning the international safeguard system has an enduring call for new solutions that help balance these competing demands. And technologies that favor one demand over another are unlikely to be accepted. So looking back, before we knew anything about DLT and how it worked, we appreciated that its basic functionality might actually offer us an ability to balance these competing demands. The automation inherent in the blockchain data structure suggested that an improvement in efficiency and effectiveness of certain workflows might be possible, while the immutability and consensus-based decision-making inherent in that same data structure might provide a new opportunity to possibly implement safeguards in a more cooperative and non-discriminatory way. And the question we faced several years ago was whether we could actually design a ledger that could be introduced into this type of system and actually articulate a set of design requirements that future ledger developers, like the ones you're going to hear from today, could follow. Now, we chose the transit matching process as our use case because it simply involved the type of problem that ledgers are typically designed to address, the need to reconcile a large number of transactions. And I should say that our sponsor really does not endorse any technologies while we're going through this type of evaluation. So let's take a look at transit matching. Transit matching, for those of you unfamiliar, it's the process of matching reports of shipments and receipts of nuclear material between facilities, within a state, and between states. And while different types of changes to nuclear material inventories may occur, transit matching is really implemented only for those reports that indicate nuclear material was shipped from or received into what's called the material balance area. A material balance area is a very specific safeguards term referring to an area inside or outside a facility where the quantity of nuclear material can be determined. So here's the thing, under the current transit matching process, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, uses a computer algorithm to match 95% of domestic reports. That's pretty good. But only 25% of foreign transfers between facilities in different countries, meaning the IAEA analyzes and matches remaining reports, 75% of foreign reports, by hand. Those are data from a few years ago. But the question still stands, what would be the design requirements for a system that improves the efficiency and effectiveness of this reconciliation process while possibly decreasing any matching delays that might indicate a diversion of nuclear material has occurred? So first, to answer this question, we had to model the workflow taking place and convert that workflow to a computer language. And to do that, we had to first consult that legal framework that I talked about earlier for direction about user roles and permissions, required documentation, submission timelines, etc. And these details would need to be incorporated into the design requirements. Next, we had to identify a data set which initially accounted for foreign and domestic transactions, as well as transactions that accounted for possible, quote, rebatching, where batches are subtracted from and added to and or renamed within a material balance area before being recorded on a physical ledger. We had a long discussion or debate about whether the rebatching process that's typically recorded in an inventory change report was necessary to include in this very basic prototype if we simply wanted to demonstrate whether a ledger could actually be designed to document shipments and receipts. Logically, modifying or renaming batches after receipt of shipment is part of a broader mass balance problem and not really part of the transit matching process. So for purposes of our very basic prototype, we just deferred the rebatching transactions to future research and just focused only on the transactions that were taking place between MBAs. And what we ended up with was basic model involving 4 types of transactions. You had the one-to-one transaction where a single shipment from one facility is documented as the same single shipment at another. You had a one-to-many where you've got a single shipment that becomes separated into several different shipments upon receipt. You had the many-to-many set where you've got many shipments, large shipments that are documented as many of the same large shipments upon receipt. And then you had the many-to-one transaction where you had many small shipments that are sent out that are ultimately combined into a single shipment upon receipt. So once we had a basic workflow to model, we could then start to identify the parties that were involved, how they interacted with each other, the conditions that were applied to those interactions, think permissions, and how the transactions would be documented on the ledger, and what the ultimate, quote, report to the IAEA would be. These user requirements, along with information about the scope of the problem we were actually capturing and the type of platform we chose to use, were all documented in a design document for future developers to study and replicate and build upon. So specifically, the prototype ultimately defined users and permissions based on guidance from that legal framework. So we identified a user as the state authority, as the central authority, and as observers, namely facilities. We established a level of sensitivity of any data posted on the ledger could not exceed. We established a methodology for determining how transactions would be reconciled. So we developed a methodology that would be automatically executed by the computer algorithms, thereby reducing risk of subjective bias being introduced in the process. And we defined a very clear set of rules for when transactions might be considered a full match. And then we determined that points would be essentially deducted if a transaction did not match in terms of, say, when masses being reported didn't match, or if dates of shipping receipts didn't really line up, or whether the number of items in the shipments varied. And we defined a really clear set of rules for determining when a transaction might be considered a partial match, and whether an inspector should be concerned about that. And then we developed a clear set of rules for determining how to handle unmatched transactions that are eventually reconciled or resolved with some clarification or correction, thus becoming a matched transaction. So based on these rules, we hypothesized that inspectors might be able to evaluate and use partial or unmatched data as a basis for future inspections. Now, in terms of the coding environment, the team just selected Hyperledger Composer Playground for a few basic reasons. It's user-friendly. The coding environment allows the developer to test the code functionality, and it's pretty modular and versatile. It would be able to scale as the data set expanded. It used a permissioned ledger. So as I mentioned, this is a very highly regulated system involving very sensitive data, and it just really wasn't conducive to being posted on a public ledger. But most importantly, we chose this particular platform because it didn't necessarily implement or require an actual cryptocurrency as to incentivize participation. The use of cryptocurrencies as part of some ledger design just wasn't really supportable in the safeguards context. I couldn't really imagine states being willing to deal with cryptocurrency payments or learning how to use them in order to simply report information to the IAEA. So it wasn't part of our discussion. So wrapping up, our final report at the time really documented a set of potential user requirements for future developers to consider. But looking back on all of this research, we actually learned a few key things that are relevant today. First of all, we determined that a ledger could certainly accommodate a central authority as a user in the system. Now, different use cases are likely going to demonstrate a different set of permissions for that central authority, and that becomes an important point later on. But at the time, simply knowing that a ledger could accommodate a role for the IAEA, that it would not replace or eliminate it as one might expect with a decentralized ledger, that was a critical finding at the time. Further defining the IAEA's roles and permissions would be a critical next step to ensure IAEA commitment to protecting safeguards confidential information. Similarly, this and other prototypes that you're going to hear about today and tomorrow have demonstrated that sensitive information doesn't necessarily have to be shared, thereby confirming adherence to the IAEA's legal obligation to protect safeguards confidential information. This and other prototypes you're going to see today should clearly demonstrate how DLT memorializes actions that have taken place as opposed to transmitting full reports that would contain safeguards confidential information. And finally, it was clear that the automation inherent in the DLT data structure was likely to reduce human errors and improve the effectiveness of safeguards inspections, something I spoke about earlier. So with that, thanks so much. I'm really excited to see where this research has evolved, and I welcome any questions from all of you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I have a quick follow-up one before going to the next speaker, and then we'll do a big Q&A at the end. What was the feedback that you received from stakeholders, whether the agency or national regulators, to that first prototype?
Well, feedback is ongoing, so I'll just capture some of the big concerns that we continue to talk about as we think about DLT deployment. Certainly cost. Cost is a big issue. How much money is it going to take to set up the infrastructure and deploy this new technology, not only within the IAEA, but also in member states? Risk is also a big question. Will the introduction of this type of, I would argue, disruptive technology introduce an additional layer of risk to the IAEA in this system that it would not be able to, IAEA be able to manage? You could define that level of risk in any number of ways, but you could start with a risk about cybersecurity vulnerabilities. And then there are the suite of questions that we get about the policy challenge, the more political challenges. You know, what, at the end of the day, the key question we have to answer here is what information actually gets posted? And that, once you start looking at that type of question, it opens up to a broader issue around operational deployment. In order for this type of system to work, you need agreement among all the states that are participating on that ledger about how it's going to work. They have to come to agreement about the infrastructure that's going to be in place, the type of information they're going to share with each other. That sort of business governance has to be negotiated, and how is that going to work? So a lot of questions still need to be unpacked about the technology. And a lot of these questions get answered as brave people like all the folks on this panel step out and really start to test out the different platforms to see what works and what doesn't work.
Well, that's actually a good lead into Pani from STUK and looking at a national prototype that was developed in collaboration with the Stimson Center. Josh, I will ask you if you are on first to share the STUK video. Or our communications team, whoever is there and can get that video up and running. Just give it a few more seconds. There's no volume, just to whoever is sharing it. This is the WebEx world. Just give us a couple of seconds as we load up that video. It is worth it. Well, Sarah, I do have a whole long list of questions for you, and I'm sure also you do for others. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation after, particularly since what we're going to be hearing now is Tapani's going to give that national a look at what the world's first DLT prototype for a national regulator, looking at the national system. And John and Michelle are going to be looking also really more at the facility level, but John, yours is also going to be looking at the national level. So comms, just one more go. Can we get that video loaded? If not, then Tapani, I will just get you to do your presentation. Since I do not hear anything from communications, Tapani, why don't you go ahead and share your screen? Actually, and remember to unmute yourself.
Actually, Cindy, 1 second. We can actually manage to do this. 1 sec.
Okay. Of Stimson Center's block. My name is Cindy Vestergaard. I'm the director of Stimson Center's Blockchain and Practice program and its Nuclear Safeguards program. Blockchain technology, or more specifically distributed ledger technology, has the potential to add an additional layer to nuclear safeguards information management systems, increasing security, efficiency, and transparency. There are 4 main elements to blockchain technology: One is hashing, essentially a digital fingerprint, which is attached to each transaction, linking them all almost like a DNA strand that travels through, meaning that the platform becomes tamper evident. Two, data is replicated and distributed among the ecosystem, meaning that there is no central point of failure. This means that number three, the ledger becomes authoritative. Everybody works from that same ledger. And then number four, there are specific permissioned access controls, meaning that not everybody has the same access to the same information, which would be in line in confidentiality rules for nuclear safeguards management. In collaboration with STUK, Finland's nuclear regulator, and the University of New South Wales in Sydney, Australia, we developed STUK, the world's first blockchain prototype for nuclear material safeguards information management. What you're going to see next is a demo, essentially a proof of concept, looking at how safeguards transactions can be handled by blockchain technology. Although fictional, STUK is based on Finland's national system of accounting for nuclear material. This system uses a database called SAFKA. So STUK emerges from a shared ledger, SAFKA. It is built in Hyperledger Fabric, which is a permission blockchain framework allowing membership and control over data and access. The STUK ecosystem involves regulators and operators. On the operator side, there's PVO and FT Power, which are operators of nuclear power plants, and DGR.org, which is the Deep Geological Repository where spent nuclear fuel will be disposed of. On the regulator side, we have FinReg, RegionReg, and WorldReg. FinReg is the national regulator, or in the Finnish sense, that would be the Radiation and Nuclear Safety Authority, or STUK. RegionReg, Euratom, WorldReg, International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, Austria. For the first transaction, we will demonstrate shipment domestic. We log in as FT Power, which is going to send a shipment to PVO. In the details, you can see the batch number is selected and the destination, PVO. And we have the ability to input the MBA and the KMP that it is coming from, as well as additional comments. In this case, we're going to make it a test shipment. So we execute the transaction. And then you can see that batch number 5, although still in our inventory, now has an in transit tag to it and also a not verified by the regulator since the location of the material has changed. To demonstrate receipt domestic, we log into STUK as PVO, the other nuclear power operator in the ecosystem. We can see that we have received a notification that FT Power has sent a batch. When we click on the notification, we can see the details as provided by FT Power, which is still the current owner, including its material form, material container, as well as the state. As the receiver, PVO can indicate the material balance area and the key measurement point. We can also add in comments. And in this case, PVO acknowledges that what it has received physically is also the same thing that is reflected on the ledger. We receive the test batch and we execute the transaction. And then you can see that batch number 5 is now in PVO's inventory, meaning it owns the material. It does have a not verified by regulator tag on it as the material has moved locations. For the last transaction, we log in as FinReg to be able to demonstrate verification by regulator. Imagine a scenario where an inspector from FinReg is physically on site at PVO, conducting a routine or unannounced inspection. In looking at batch 5, they have the ability to go into STUK, see the details of that specific batch, everything from the material form to the isotopic weight, measurement, the provenance of the batch, and all comments that are attached to it. In this case, the inspector confirms that what is on the ledger is also what is physically verified. And then it can click the verify button. Before we do that, though, just to show you what FinReg has the ability to see on STUK, it's very different than for the other nuclear operators. FinReg has the ability to look at the inventory in every operator, whether it be DGR.org, PVO, or FT Power. It can also query specifically by specific MBAs, or also when a nuclear material was last transacted. So in this case, on site, the inspector can click the verify button. And then batch number 5, which is in PVO's inventory, shows up with a tag verified by regulator. To ensure compliance with confidentiality rules for nuclear material, operators and regulators have access to different types of information. The permissions in STUK allow operators to fully see their own inventories, but not the inventory of another operator. They also have the ability to query and to transact. Regulators have the ability to see inventory in every operator. They have full oversight, full access, also the ability to verify and to query. As you can see, SLAFCA is a new way of reporting. Instead of the current one-way, too often paper-based system, from operator to national or regional regulator to the International Atomic Energy Agency in Vienna, SLAFCA is a network system, essentially where operators transact among each other and regulators have full oversight of the transactions. Next step is to look at other aspects of nuclear material accounting and control, such as transport of nuclear materials nationally and internationally, to bilateral nuclear cooperation agreements and export controls. It's been a pleasure to work with STUK and University of New South Wales, and we look forward to building on SLAFCA to demonstrate the potential of the technology in real-world applications. Great, thank you so much, Katie. And Tapani, we will put it over to you and you can share your slides and tell us more about SLAFCA.
Thank you. I try to be quick, so what can you see now?
We can see it starting to load. We can see it. Perfect. Thanks,
Okay.
Tapani.
Fine. Yes, it's really a pleasure to be here today. So and also be involved in this SLAFCA family. So we had a very good time with Cindy and these Australian guys to create this demo. So what I would like to tell you today is that a little bit about the real world. So you saw the SLAFCA imaginary world. So I spend a minute to show what is the real situation in Finland, because it's based on, of course, the it has some resemblance to the state of Finland it is now, and SLAFCA achievements and some future ideas what we have. So as in the SLAFCA world, there are 2 nuclear power plants, and then there's this final repository project is developing. This plan to start the operation in 2025, and STUK is of course interested in SLAFCA because it fits into our strategy. Digitalization is one, and also we would like to develop flexible and efficient working method here. And I would want to also tell you about our mission, because I want to emphasize that we not only protect today's people, but we also care about future generations from the harmful effects of radiation. So, and here in the real world, we have FINREG is STUK, regional reg is European Commission, and then we have this big global agency. So there's lots of resemblance in the real world with what SLAFCA was made on. So we didn't invent any new ideas here. So we have different roles, but we do have this reporting system. So accountancy and control goes in a typical way, like everywhere else in the world. So the operators, they report both to STUK and to the European Commission. Then European Commission forwards the information to the IAEA. So reporting schemes are like this. So this bit modified what the Stimson Center graphics was about. So you'll see that STUK has its own national database, and it's called SAFCA, and then European Commission has its own. So in principle, same information is in 3 places, and that's of course quite a can be a mess, because we cannot actually check that we don't have access to each other's databases, so we don't really 100% sure know what kind of records the agency or what kind of records the European Commission has or have. So it's this kind of a general ledger SLAFCA type of thing would be really nice. So then it's authoritative all we have a same understanding about the situation in Finland. So STUK viewpoint on Slavka today is that we believe that this Slavka was a very successful demonstration. Indeed, I don't know if Cindy is going to tell you some news tomorrow, but stay tuned.
I completely concur.
Yes. Okay. And this technology is surely worth promoting further. But in order to have this kind of system working at first in Europe, for instance, so we need the European Commission and the agency on the boat. So we cannot start developing this Slavka by ourselves in Finland. But clearly the European Union, European Commission safeguards may provide a framework where this DLT-based reporting could be first implemented and developed in the world. And I think it's maybe easier to handle within this kind of group of states like the European Union, which sometimes maybe it's a bit easier to reach consensus within EU than globally. So we have a plan to visit Luxembourg in the near future and start maybe if we can have a project or not. But of course, it's a big step, and you need to put a really big number of money and investment and effort into that. So what Sarah said, that there are risks when you are making this kind of new developments. So it's some risks can be mitigated if you are starting with a smaller group of the states, but nevertheless, even in European scale, the risks are there. So usually the software development is more difficult than you first imagine. What future DLT projects? So there's a good discussion in Slavka report, so I can refer to that one. So security functionality, additional protocol declarations, broader safeguards applications, whatever. We can think of any information that deserves authentication. In Finland, we have this very challenging problem, or actually, some people think that's a solution, and it's a solution. We can get rid of the high-level nuclear waste by disposing it into bedrock, and from safety point of view, we can forget it there. But from safeguards point, it's a challenge. So what we put down there, it's also we should also think about future generations. So if we remember this STUK mission, so we need to think of them. So how these future generations can be convinced that the fuel disposed is actually what is declared. So the future generations do not have access to the fuel itself. They have access to the information we have left behind. And this is something that we should create consensus between different inspectorates and stakeholders. But we should also authenticate or protect this information in a way that the future generations can really take this piece of information we leave behind as a true declaration about nuclear material being disposed. So even 100 years after today, so future generations can be confident that what we did here in our generation did is really something they can rely on. So that was my short presentation. I hope it wasn't too long, but
that was perfect, Tapani. Thank you so much. And it was a real pleasure to work on this, and we can get more into the questions certainly. But any other feedback that you recall that we've received over the demos that stand out for you as some of the most interesting in terms of the feedback?
That was a good question. We received lots of feedback, so even from other because this is not a nuclear thing, this DLT, so it can be used everywhere basically. So, but I think this was at least we got some credit that we are quite courageous, so we will investigate these kind of new technologies in our nuclear area, which is considered to be quite conservative. So
very good point. Tapani, just also if you could stop sharing your screen, and then John, you can. But I will take that point, and this is something that Tapani, you just mentioned, where, you know, the nuclear sector is a very conservative sector. And so we, as Sarah mentioned, there's a lot of risks, of course, and it's a very risk-averse sector, and rightly so. Any misstep, of course, has consequences, whether that be for environmental or human safety and security, and also for international security. So this is also something in terms of the testing, what Sarah has done, and then with SLAFCA, taking one step at a time, and also to socialize and really raise awareness about the technology as well. John, I will pass it on to you, and talking about track and trace nuclear waste by Jistuin.
Yep, thank you, Cindy. So yep, let's crack on because we have a short slot. So yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about what we do in general as a business, how that meets challenges in the nuclear industry. That's why we're all here, and then give you a very quick walkthrough of the platform itself as a kind of live demo, just to see sort of how it works. And then I've got some conclusions that we might bring into the panel piece at the end. So just a little bit about Jistuin. I've put in the presidential executive order on improving the nation's cybersecurity as one example of a motivation. Obviously, we're over 3 years old now, and we've been following things like national infrastructure directives and various other moves in the sensitive and critical industries to improve cybersecurity, to move to a posture of resilience rather than blind hope in IT. So there have been lots of motivations, but the executive order on moving towards trust and transparency in our infrastructure, I think, is a great example and a good modern example of the kind of thing that we are working to help people do. So we have a general product, a platform, which is built to help boost operational efficiency, maintain safety by getting the right data, the right place at the right time, for critical decision making. So this is all really about that movement of information, and we've heard a few times in the first presentations that, you know, the important thing is not all of the data or everything, but a manifest of what's moving or a summary of a critical decision that's made. Those kinds of data points. If you can't trust that data when it comes into you from your partners, you can't use it, and if you can't use it, you don't get the benefits of digital. So this is all about using trust and transparency and security in order to enable what digital promises to everybody, but often ends up being, as we heard the 75% statistic just a moment ago, still a manual process. We do that by maintaining a permanent record of who did what when. This is fairly common blockchain stuff. You know, you keep records, you remember what happened, and then you go back and check it later. But we've built this into a system which is focused on asset management and asset life cycles, so that you have a kind of single source of truth. You can't modify things, backdate them, shred them, whatever. But you get to look into this not as a transaction farm or some kind of token manager, but as a cyber physical asset management system, so that it makes sense to people what they're looking at. It can be applied to business processes. With that in mind, we do have a strong sort of privacy and governance layer to this. So, you know, the whole point of blockchains is to make everything transparent and verifiable by everybody. Of course, the downside of that is that if you're operating in sensitive supply chains or you're operating in a competitive environment, you can't just let everybody see everything. You've got to have some governance. So we have a strong privacy layer that makes sure that if you see something, you can be dead certain that it is the correct thing that everybody else sees. But if you're not entitled to see something, you don't get it. And all of this, crucially, is done in a sort of low code, no code kind of way. So, you know, we didn't start off in nuclear. That was a new thing for us about a year or so in. But we have always been operating in sort of sensitive industry, advanced manufacturing, civil use cases. And so as probably many of you have encountered, if you go into an existing facility or into an electric grid or something like that, and you ask them to change the code on their equipment that runs inside the building, they can't do it. You can't crack open the box. You don't have the source code anymore. So having this very, very light, very standards-based, low or no code integration is also extremely important. So what we've done is to take the principles of blockchain that give you this kind of thing, but taken all of the complexity, wallet management, keys, mnemonics, all of that modern, difficult stuff away and turned it into an accessible platform. So along came a challenge jointly run by Sellafield, which is kind of the biggest processor of low and intermediate level waste in the UK, and the Digital Catapult, which is the UK authority on digital technology. So they advise the government and standards of organizations on kind of the state of the art. And this is the wording of the challenge. I won't read it out, but you kind of highlight a few things. Although it's looking at physical waste movements with the ultimate business aim of speeding that up, because I think it's important to point out nobody was ever worried about doing this job correctly. They definitely do the job correctly, but the records, proving things are suitable, making sure that manufacturing handling processes are all done correctly, that takes a lot of time and manual effort. And what they want to do is speed that up so that they spend less time handling this waste and more time putting it in the ground. And so all of these things that I've highlighted here very much smelled to us like blockchain type things. They look like what we can do on our platform. So we just went ahead and answered the challenge and said, we'll do it on our standard platform. Couple of modifications, a little bit of word changes and whatever, but basically using a very industrially focused and very asset-centric platform, granted, but essentially a generic blockchain track and trace platform. We pitched this against 30 other companies and we were selected because it turns out the availability of the thing is much more interesting than having a science experiment. So, from the very, very beginning, it's a very practical exercise. And what we did, deliberately obscured, by the way, we'll never be able to read the words on this slide for obvious reasons. We went through and mapped their waste life cycle and the steps, and we found the pinch points along the way of what's easy, what's hard. And then we identified where we could get some business benefit from having high integrity records. So where along the way was time lost to duplicating documents, potentially losing documents, potential misunderstandings if you've got the wrong versions of documents, all that kind of thing, all the administrative overhead that slows things down when you're not sure what you're doing. Mapped all those out, worked them out, qualified them, and turned them into a bunch of smart contract and RESTful processes to take this basic thing and turn it into a shared waste history. So again, with all of that governance and control of access, you can have all of your sort of bills of materials, your type approvals, all of your radiological scans, all the movements, all of that in one place, high integrity, readily available in real time, where the national authority can see absolutely everything. So they can now make nationwide and estate-wide calculations, capacity planning, all that kind of thing. The individual operators know that they're working on the best possible available data right now for them, and nobody needs to worry about signing off duplicate forms, sending them to the right place, losing them, updating them, or having things left in yards for a week longer than they should be. What that gives you ultimately is mutually assured data. So what I want to show you very quickly is how that works. So I'm going to quickly end this and switch my share. If it'll let me do that. Does someone let me do that? There we go. And show the actual thing. So first thing to point out, because we're here in a sort of prototypes capacity, but this is running on our live platform. This is the thing that people can use today. It's a real thing. It's just loaded up with fake data because we don't like giving our customers data away on open phone calls. But just to give you a very quick view of how it looks. An estate view, you can see where all your things are at a click. You can see everything that's in this facility, for example. You've got complete control over all of your various assets. So it's not like you have one system for your packs and another system for some IoT vendor or whatever. Everything's in the same place and can be linked and tracked and traced together, so that you can have, for example, management of drums with stuff like, let's come in here. You can get, I need to move everybody out of the way to click a button. This guy. So you can have things like high integrity and high fidelity evidence, which is difficult on a traditional blockchain platform, but because we've got the whole thing set up as a SaaS service, we can have very large files, which allows you to join together physical and logical kind of processes. So for example, if you've got that barrel and you want to move it somewhere, you want to stick it inside a cask to take it down the road. Well, the first thing we do is we join these two things together. So we say, yes, we've put that particular drum in here, so it's there now joined. We then can track it not only in sort of transactions and text, but even track it in real time with the Tragis system, logging all of these kinds of actions along the way. And then at some point after the event, or even in real time, if they care to watch, people are then able to correlate that with things like the original paper instruction that was given to the driver based on all of the approved routings, the police approvals, the city proximity, and everything else. So by bringing all of these things together into one place, you're able to sort of do this magical digital real-time monitoring of the estate and seeing where things are going. And if it starts to go wrong, you can correct it. But we're able to do that with a linkage to traditional manual paper-based processes. So you don't have to digitize everybody at the same time. They can come on at their own pace. When they've got the system in place, they can use it. That's cool. If they don't, then no foul. You just carry on as you were. And that even goes as far as sort of approvals and things. So one of the big benefits that came out of the project that we did with Sellafield was actually to do what-if analysis, because as you'll all know, it's super expensive to undo a mistake that's already made. So it's nice to have a blockchain that tells you really, really confidently that you screwed up. And that kind of helps, at least with the sort of root cause analysis, but it's too late by then. So what we also did is to digitize things like the waste acceptance criteria, capacities, weights, radiation limits, type handlings, and things like that. We digitized the acceptance criteria and put a life cycle on these documents, so that when, for example, you have a container and you're tracking what that container is doing. Part of that life cycle, of course, is that you need to have that container as full as possible because you want your capacity to be maintained. So we've got things like loading bags, we've got items inside those bags, we're treating them, and all of a sudden, you'll see there's a pre-flight check here. What we're able to do on the blockchain before anything happens, because we've got the whole system context and we know the acceptance criteria for the stream that this thing is destined for, we're actually able to compare all of those before it's committed, and not only have a kind of a computer digital no, we return false, yeah, sure, that's lovely, but we're also able to, again, integrate with their sort of manual reporting and validation systems, give all of the standard format sort of pass and fail analysis and spit that out automatically so that they can see what's going on. And as I mentioned, this is not just for you failed, try again, but also for life cycle type events where things will change in the future, or maybe you're using up capacity, or you've got a trade-off of, you can have so much of one fingerprint, but only if it's less than so much of another fingerprint. You're actually able to do more complex things, like in this case, say, well, next year the rules are changing. So right now you're fine, but if this thing's going to take more than 3 months, it will fail by the time it gets to the other end. And again, you can start to use that information to make smart, in this case, fairly long range decisions. But in fact, where this is destined for is being able to make very smart near-term decisions like, do I put this on the truck now, or do I wait 3 days and put it on the much cheaper train transit? So all of this decision support that digital has always promised, we found we were able to kind of unlock all of that digital promise by having very high fidelity, high confidence access to the data that currently is shared, but is shared in very clumsy ways because of IT systems and silos and things like that. So where where this got us to, just for some couple of conclusions, are a handful of things that were really important. So we did definitely find, and it was definitely reflected to us, that we were able to sort of speed things up, much better ability to collaborate across sites and companies, and having the complete life cycle traceability from start to finish. Those were really big benefits. Today, they're locked up in different databases in different bits of the process. And with technology like this, you can actually make much better long-term estate-wide decisions. So it was a success for sure. We did also conclude and discover that you need sort of all three of these benefits: the provenance, the governance, sort of security control, and the immutability piece. If you didn't have any one of those, it didn't really work. It wasn't much better than a database. It wasn't much faster than the manual processes. But if you put all three together, that was the key to unlocking speed and so on. And so there you go. That's kind of it in a very fast 14-minute nutshell. But yeah, DLT done right with all of those properties definitely had a lot of promise for unlocking digital value in nuclear waste handling.
Thank you, John. Yeah, so this was really a national system. No, it wasn't tracking material globally, or what it was within national borders.
It's just national, but national includes quite a number of different companies. So rather than being, it didn't have some of the political ramifications of non-proliferation or balance of trade kind of considerations, but it is across borders that were formerly closed and opaque to each other. So a lot of the technical challenges I trust you to see my summaries, but I don't let you inside my database because you're welcome to have the answer, but you can't see the process kind of thing. All of those things are included in this platform because they're necessary for commercial reasons between the various waste handling and transit companies. So there's a lot of learning, I think, in this national system that can be taken to international cases too.
Yes, definitely. Michelle, are you able to share your screen? I know you've had a little bit of technical difficulty. Let me know if you need to log in. All right, without the video, no problem, Michelle. Give it a go.
I will my one and
Perfect.
and we can kind of play back, and if there's not, I'll keep the video on.
I think there is a playback, Michelle. You might want to keep your video off.
Okay.
From the beginning, and then we're good.
From the beginning. There, how's that? Can you hear me okay, Cindy?
Looks good. Yep, all good.
Perfect. Excellent. Okay. So thank you so much for joining us this morning. My name is Michelle Lunny. I'm the Vice President of Business Development for OARO. And as Cindy has said, we are based, our head office is in Canada and also in Madrid, Spain. OARO is a blockchain organization that really has built a number of SaaS solutions that caters to industries that we would say are typically highly regulated. And the solutions that we have built are really focused around the aero defense, nuclear, small modular reactor industries, manufacturing, and pharmaceutical companies. Two of the use cases I'm going to speak about right now that specifically focus on the nuclear industry. One is focusing on supply chain and specifically on an issue that at this point in time in 2021 would be over $1 billion problem that the industry understands exists and has been trying to figure out a way to manage it with the expanding global supply chain. The acronym that they use in the industry is called CFSI, which is Counterfeit, Fraudulent, Suspect Items. And the solution that OARO has developed is really one that will help mitigate the risks as it relates to CFSI, and it will also improve the quality of the supply chain greatly for the nuclear industry and the SMR industry. So just a small slide on what OARO is trying to do. We are, in essence, using our blockchain distributed ledger to create more trust in the digital world that the supply chain now
I think we have lost Michelle. Michelle, are you there? Well, what I can do then is I can start to ask some questions of our other speakers while Michelle is, her internet is down. This is, you know, always a really interesting discussion, and I'm hoping she'll be able to come back and talk more about their enterprise solutions. One of the questions actually that we have, and I'll just take a couple of questions from the audience first. A question was actually to you, Sarah, and that was whether the design, the design document that you mentioned in your presentation, is that something that is available?
Yes, I would have to double check with the folks who paid for the work to make sure that I could share it, but I do believe it is available and open to feedback.
Okay, well, that's good. And where would they find that?
If you could contact me offline, I can work on getting you a copy of that. Again, I'd have to ask for permission from the folks who paid for the work.
Right, yeah, great. Michelle, how are things going? No, I still see an exclamation mark beside her. Another question was, how does the privacy layer work with a shared DLT, and where does central authorization take place? So maybe John, would you be interested in taking that one? And then first?
Yeah, so it's interesting to call it a privacy layer because I'm not sure who asked the question, whether you actually sort of develop Web3 systems or not, but there are no layers in Web3 anymore. There are just a whole load of things all over the place that you need to deal with. So we've implemented it in a handful of places. So important considerations are core identity. So, you know, if you're going to have privacy and secrecy, you need to know who you're dealing with. And that is almost never a blockchain wallet key. It's something else that gave people access to that blockchain wallet key, and so on and so on. So you need to know what the fundamental core identity is that somebody used, whether it's their corporate login, whether it's a password, it doesn't matter. You need to know what that is. Once you've got that, mapping that into blockchain concepts needs to be done securely. So traditional cryptographic key management, you need to get that right. That's hard, but it's possible to get it right. My background, by the way, is in sort of high grade sensitive key management. So I'm kind of a crypto nerd, but spare you the details. But that first step is incredibly important. Once you've done that, then we're live on Quorum. We've got a few different underlays that we can use, but our production network is Quorum, so it's basically Ethereum based. So we use confidential transactions for doing the kind of grouping of sort of coarse grouping of making things available to different clients. And then we have some, pretty much all of our patents really are in the handling that goes into that, and some extensions to smart contracts that let you then do things like redactions, GDPR, policy management, and stuff like that. So you can put it together mostly from, you know, key management, identity, and private confidential transactions. Where we found the state of the art not good enough, and we had to actually invent technology, was for things like taking personal names out of records, things like that. We've actually had to add some special sort of partial privacy and group encryption kind of stuff in there. But there's no layer. You know, if you're relying on layers, you're doomed, because people have access to the top and the bottom. in all cases. So you've got to implement everything in its own capsule.
Sarah, Tapani, do you want to mention anything about the idea of a central authority or central authorization, particularly in the IAEA context? Oh, Michelle is back. Hang on to that thought. And let's just give her a chance to, Michelle, you look, it's a total clean screen. Let's give it another try. I can't hear you though, I think you're muted. There we go.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Can you see the screen
Turn
now?
on. Not yet. Sarah, do you want to maybe answer that question? And answer? Oh, Michelle, you're not able to share screen?
Let's see.
There we go. It's coming back. Perfect. And we're losing her again, I see. Sarah, take it over on centralization.
If I understand the question correctly, I mean, the role of the central authority is a very interesting one. The presentation we just saw from Jistuin is a good one because it's demonstrating a very useful ledger that's taking place between peers, a decentralized network of peers that already exists. The role of the IAEA as the central authority in a ledger is a sensitive one because the IAEA has a legal obligation in the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement to protect, safeguard, and confidential information. And so that same obligation isn't necessarily imposed on states. It's not explicitly written out in the Safeguards Agreement because it's organic, right? States are naturally going to want to protect their safeguards information. So it's up to the states to determine what information they want to share with each other. If you have the IAEA making a determination from the centralized authority position about what information to share, there's going to be a conflict with the legal agreement. The Jistuin model is a very interesting one because you don't have the central authority making that decision about what information to share. The information being shared is being determined by the states. So that's an important distinction to make and one to think about when you are assigning roles and permissions to a central authority. You always have to ask yourself, is this set of transactions taking place something where you can really remove a central authority from the decision-making process? If not, what roles and permissions are you going to apply to that central authority? I hope that answered your question. You're muted, Cindy.
The IAEA won't be disrupted, right? I mean, it's still the central verification and the authority in terms of declarations, verifications, but it's still, what we're talking about here still requires some type of authority because it is nuclear regulation and oversight or international treaty, I should say, sorry.
Yeah, I should be clear. We're never going to get rid of the IAEA from the safeguard system. Not. The IAEA, by its mandate, has a role in conducting physical inspections to verify the information being reported by states. It's a question of what role and permission that central authority has on your ledger. If the states come together and say, we would like to share this information with the IAEA and with each other, great. But if the IAEA has a responsibility or a role to actually post certain information on the ledger, that's going to raise questions about whether or not it can do so. So I encourage folks who are thinking about different instantiations of a ledger to really think carefully about the roles and permissions that you are going to give a central authority. But yeah, the big caveat in all this is you're not going to get rid of the IAEA. We love the IAEA and we don't want you to go away.
Exactly. Same thing with STUK. We do need our national regional and international regulators. Michelle, welcome back. Let's give it another go to share the presentation. You might want to turn off your video.
Yes, I'll do that now.
Great. And we're just waiting for Michelle to share her screen, and we'll hopefully, fingers crossed, third time as a go, Michelle. There we go, looking good.
Can you still
Perfect.
hear me?
Yes.
Excellent. So I know we're way under the gun for time here, so I'll just move forward basically. So OARO Comply, as I had mentioned, really was developed to solve the issue with the counterfeit, fraudulent, suspect items within the nuclear supply chain. We have focused here in Canada on working with a very large nuclear organization that deals with 8 to 10 very large suppliers. And really what we're developing is a trust framework by which all of the documentation, certification of testing of parts is used by OARO Comply, and that there is, we call, one source of the truth, from the major manufacturers and suppliers to the sub-suppliers and the distributors. And really what we are attempting to do is build this trusted framework between the suppliers and their sub-suppliers and the nuclear stations, so that there is an understanding and a verification that the documentation, identification, again, certification of testing, and also parts and goods have been verified and authenticated and are on our digital ledger as a digital asset that cannot be altered. We understand in the supply chain process that testing of parts and components and certification of testing is a very critical part that requires both pictures and videos, which are a part of our solution. So what that does is it ups the ante and the understanding that when there is sign off on authentication of parts and services, that there is critical certified digital documentation that accompanies that. From just a purely business and operational perspective, it really leans out the processes in the supply chain. It greatly reduces the boots on the ground, the people that are doing the physical audits today within the nuclear stations. It greatly reduces the risk in terms of having counterfeit items enter into the nuclear supply chain. And there's a significant expense reduction in the amount of physical audits that need to be done. And from a carbon footprint perspective, there's a great reduction in travel needed because of not needing these quality management, physical audit folks doing the auditing, because the OARO Comply is going to do that for them. One example I'll use is that the way that OARO Comply was originally developed was with GlaxoSmithKline in Spain. And many of these regulated, highly run organizations that have to comply with federal regulations are very heavy paper-based. So we digitized all of GSK Spain's manufacturing processes. And we also, through our permission-based OARO Comply software, were able to greatly improve the efficiency of the manufacturing. We reduced a tremendous amount of human risk in terms of sign-off and testing of the pharmaceutical items. And one of the slides that I didn't include in this, but certainly would be willing if anyone wants to speak to it, we did an ROI assessment, kind of a return on investment and business benefits following year one of the implementation of OARO Comply.
And I think we've lost her again. We know Canadian internet can be good, so I'm hoping there's no snowstorm or something that's going on. Michelle? Nope. I do have a question here that, again, I will pose to Sarah and to Pani as well, which is, will the blockchain frameworks need to adapt to existing legal agreements, or will legal amendments or future agreements need to account for, or maybe even assume, DLT verification? So essentially, I mean, what we've been talking about today really is that the rules of the road are very regulated in the nuclear sector, and DLT works very well there. So, but do legal agreements need to be adapted to be able to take on or include, I would say, DLT as part of the verification process, data integrity, for example, as well.
So I always get a little nervous when people start talking about updating the IAEA safeguards agreements. I think the IAEA might get a little nervous about that too. Those are carefully negotiated agreements. And so I would hesitate to say that we're going to update those agreements. I think more practically speaking, and this is where the STUK model is very interesting, or the SLAFCA prototype is very interesting. You know, at the end of the day, states need to meet their safeguards agreements, meet the obligations in those safeguards agreements. And the existing legal framework, the Comprehensive Safeguards Agreement, has a provision that allows the IAEA to explore new technologies that can improve the efficiency and effectiveness of safeguards verification activities. There's nothing in the agreement that says you can or cannot use a technology like blockchain. At the end of the day, if a state can use distributed ledger technology and meet its safeguards obligations, great. The problem will arise if if you use the ledger and you can't meet your safeguards agreement. That's going to cause the problem. So I think, you know, the approach that you're taking here in designing a ledger that demonstrates how you can meet those obligations is the way to go. Approaching this problem with the intent of updating the legal framework that's well in place is probably going to be a very uphill battle, to say the least.
Great. Michelle, you're back. Over to you. Thanks.
My apologies, folks. So I was talking about the OARO access with thermal screening. So really, in essence, what this is, it's using a person's biometric profile, creating a digital ID on blockchain. And this slide just simply shows if you runs one reactor, CANDU reactor, has up to 700 to 800 employees. And when they run an outage, a nuclear outage for 30 to 40 days, at any given time, they could have an extra 500 contractors on site with that outage. So today, as we know, most nuclear stations use key card access. They use thumbprint scanners and wrist scanners, which, as we know with COVID-19, I call them Petri dishes. So really what OARO access is with thermal screening, it's a way to be able to onboard yourself remotely with your own cell phone using OARO software. You take a digital selfie, front and side profile, and it's matched with your government issued ID. And then your actual photo ID and your facial recognition with a liveness check is created. And then you now have a biometric profile that's been encrypted. And this is what you'll use to be able to enter into the nuclear facility. What I love about this solution is that it's permission-based. So, for example, when I enter into a nuclear facility, currently today, if you walk in and you go through using you see on the right-hand side, the Suprema camera, within less than 1 second after I've been onboarded, it recognizes that I am Michelle Lunny. And maybe Michelle Lunny is the manager of supply chain, and I have access to the STUK building and building A and building B. And it can even give permission based in terms of which rooms and conference rooms I have access to. So it really, and also within less than 1 second, it takes my
And I think we have lost her again. Michelle? So then moving on to another question, and I will actually ask John from Jistuin, in terms of, you know, the feedback that you're receiving from the, Michelle, are you there? No. The feedback that you're receiving to the prototype, really to the proof of concept. And what are you noticing in terms of, you know, potential barriers for adoption, or, you know, or not?
Yeah, so any project, nuclear is no different. Anything that involves physical equipment obviously implies a huge invested estate. And so, change to processes is genuinely difficult. Even if people want to do it, you've got a new software investment, you're going to have to upgrade your firewalls. There's all sorts of inertia over that, not to mention the 3 or 5 or 10,000 people who are trained in the exact processes you have today, and you have to retrain them and write your process manuals and stuff. So where we've had really positive feedback and where we work very hard is on that accessibility layer to make sure that it's as least disruptive as possible. So one great example, we just had the question a moment ago about sort of central authentication. So one place where we made a very, very quick win on our platform versus a number of the others that were in that tender is that we can have a centralized authentication, but we don't like to. We actually like to have the all of the sign-in decentralized and off in other people's places. So the processing facilities, the generating facilities, the transit people, they all have their own IT already that's heavily governed by all kinds of laws and regulations and compliance. So, good on you, keep that. And we make a single certificate sort of connection between those things. And then everybody in the system signs in using their own choice of ID system, their own hardware second factor, their own IT onboarding, offboarding, and fraud prevention systems. Nothing of that is touched. There's no federation. There's no getting inside each other's databases and whatever. So the fact that we're able to integrate this thing with very minimal intrusion into the traditional IT and databases and stuff, that was a huge first win, because then you can focus on adding some positives on top rather than having to patch up all of the negatives on the inside, which of course is always very, very thankless task.
It is, yes. Michelle, I think we will not share slides. I would prefer if you just spoke and told us a little bit more about how your stakeholders, I mean, you're talking about Canadian nuclear facilities and companies that are actually not even just testing, but even, if I'm not mistaken, employing the OARO comply or the OARO access. So I'd be grateful for your thoughts on what they're noticing, how they're interacting with it, and what is the feedback you're getting?
Sure. I'll start with OARO Comply for supply chain, CFSI quality management. The feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. We attended a 2-day conference with the OCNI, Association of Canadian Nuclear Suppliers.
Yep, she's gone again. Tapani, what do you think about, I mean, one of the things you had mentioned was, of course, the European Union and the visit that we need to make in 2022. But, what are your other thoughts about in terms of, in feedback or not necessarily feedback, but in terms of barriers potentially for adoption?
Good question. So I think this is the most exciting webinar I've ever participated. So never knows what happens next. But it's about this question. I think the last question you Sarah answered about the reporting and legal implications. So we must remember that this is a multi-layer system. So we have NPT, comprehensive safeguards agreements, and we have subsidy arrangements, and finally facility attachments. So if we go to the subsidy arrangement, I think it's not an overwhelming task to change the reporting scheme. It's a big task, of course, but this is something we can do without changing the basic agreements and treaties. So it's doable. But I think the big obstacle is really to get these organizations to convince them that the benefits are greater than really the risks. And there may be some kind of thinking like the resistance, that they don't fix it if it works. So if they have an existing reporting scheme which works satisfactory from their point of view, I think that can be the main obstacle we have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do have a question here from the audience, and that is specifically to John. And there's acronyms here, John, that I know you use, but I forget them. But John, to discuss OBAC and ABAC, the power that they bring to the data sharing community.
Sure. So ABAC stands for attribute-based access control, and OBAC is organization-based access control. The second one is quite obscure. I'm not surprised people don't know that, but it's when you talk about decentralized systems, there are two different layers of entity that you're always dealing with. You've got a kind of corporate legal entity that encapsulates a whole group of things, users, machines, services, whatever it might be. And then within each of those, you've got a set of regular kind of people and users where you'd understand that some people are administrators and some are not, and some have access to the finance system and some don't, stuff like that. So blockchains natively work at the organization level. Essentially, if you've got nodes, that's the level at which other people have control as to whether I give you stuff or believe stuff from you or will do what you tell me to. But that isn't how the real world works. The real world still likes to have other finer grained things. So what we do is we use something which is popular in modern data store type applications, which is ABAC, which is that I don't define roles or have endless tables of what group is this person in or things like that, all of the traditional IT management, because it doesn't work. It doesn't scale to the complexity of the types of things you want to do. Instead, what you do to define access is you say, well, if this person has a particular attribute, which might be that they have a qualification. If we look at what we were talking about a moment ago with the OARO, if they have passed their basic nuclear handling qualification, they can get access to my front door system, no matter where they come from or what IT system they're based in or whatever. Or, if this person, has a particular color of shoes, they are allowed to access my financial records. It doesn't matter what the thing is. But the point is, instead of trying to group everybody into subsets where, frankly, it is mathematically provable, you cannot create the partial orderings that are required to actually allocate groups of people into a Venn diagram of groups of data. What you do is you say, well, anybody qualified to do X can see the data that is tagged as related to X. And then we calculate all of that as we go along so that you don't have sort of mind-bending cross-domain access policies to write. You just say, well, this data is for this purpose, and this accessing entity is qualified for this purpose. So off we go. We'll join that thing together. It's another example. I mean, you can read about it. It's got a Wikipedia page and stuff, but it's another example where we've tried to bring some of the very sort of high-end self-sovereign identity, decentralized blockchain type concepts, and just bring them back to a level that are actually implementable in today's IT system, so that people in real companies can use it now, rather than having to wait until they refresh their entire IT estate.
Right. So a couple of other questions here before we've got about 4 minutes left, I think. But has DLT ever been hacked? John, Sarah, do you know?
Sure. Yes, no. The answer is yes. The longer answer is, what does hacked mean?
Right.
So, I mean, genuinely, yes, some DLT implementations have actually been hacked, but it's very rare. I think if the question is honest, I'm not. The questions like this are sometimes earnest and sometimes a bit cheeky, and I'm not sure which way around it goes. But all software can be hacked, and I think the way to think about DLT is no different. It is not magic. It's just trying to do a job as part of a much bigger system. And what tended to happen in the early days was that people thought it was very magic. They wrote terrible smart contracts or terrible normal software that was reading the stuff off the blockchain, and it was that piece on the top that got hacked. So Mt. Gox, the whatever $560 million that was stolen there, the various account drains from the cloud wallets and things like that. None of that was hacking the blockchain. All of that was bad code. So
Right.
go figure. But the more important point is, just because it's got a blockchain doesn't make it secure.
Right.
I think that's
But it
the
is, as you said here, you know, the blockchain itself has not been hacked. There might be the other, let's say, aspects of it. I mean, same
Yeah.
thing with a lot of cryptocurrency heists. It's because public-private keys were stolen, not because the actual cryptocurrency was, you know, the platform was hacked, for example. Sarah, do you have anything to add there?
Um, uh, my initial response was going to be the same. And I would just add that, you know, it's worth remembering that our existing digital systems and safeguards infrastructure is vulnerable to attack. What's interesting about this technology is that there are multiple layers of encryption inherent in the blockchain data structure that extends the time it takes to hack into the system. And so I'm not a cyber person. I can barely work my computer. I was amazed I got it to work on this panel, frankly. But I think the thing to focus on here is the resilience that a decentralized distributed ledger can offer you, and compare that to what you have today, because the systems that we have today are equally as vulnerable.
Right.
Yeah.
I think
Dead right. Resilience. Anybody who thinks they can be secure is just wrong. And even if they're right today, they'll be wrong tomorrow. So absolutely dead right, Sarah. Resilience is what you have to aim for. Nothing. There is nothing else.
exactly. And with data being distributed, it goes to what Tapani had said earlier, is that if everybody has different databases, and we don't even know what the data is that everyone is sharing, or what we've supplied is actually the same in someone else's database, that resiliency as well that's built into DLT in terms of the sharing and distribution also helps to build in additional resilience to it. So on that note, I will end the session. Hopefully, I will talk to you all if we can also share your videos and presentations online. Michelle, we will definitely make sure your PowerPoint presentation is made available. And the next session will start at 12:45. So I look forward to seeing you all and our live audience again in about 15 minutes. And then Lovely Umayam will moderate. Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.
Okay, I think we are now live. Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome back to our event today, Hashing the Atom, Exploring Blockchain Solutions for Global Security. First of all, my name is Lovely Umayam, and I am a non-resident fellow at the Stimson Center, where I research blockchain's prospects to strengthen nuclear security. But more importantly, I am your moderator for today's second session. So we are continuing the theme of pioneering blockchain. And I think in any conversation about new and breakthrough technologies, it's important to acknowledge the first R&D projects to sort of test the waters by pairing our healthy skepticism with openness to knowledge that can eventually help us move from ideation to practice. And after listening to the first session earlier today, I think we are gaining a better appreciation for what innovation really entails, right? It's not just about developing the tech, but also navigating the social and legal components of it, may it be from educating potential stakeholders, integrating new tech into existing frameworks, anticipating sustainability, and all of that. So there is a lot of learning, questioning, and risk-taking involved. And what we really wanted to do here is to carve out a space to have an honest conversation about that process. So in the next hour, we will have the opportunity to look at two projects that aim to apply blockchain within the nuclear enterprise beyond sort of physical asset management, which was really the focus of session one. And I think that these projects are also relatively contained in that the participating stakeholders are between facility and regulator or within a facility with the goal of information assurance. So how can DLT increase assurance and transparency to make these stakeholders feel confident about the information that they're viewing or using, encourages teams to work better, and all of that. So with that said, I wanted to briefly introduce our two speakers. Our first speaker is Alan Simpson. He is the technical lead in the UK National Nuclear Laboratories Nuclear and Reactor Physics team. His projects range across the nuclear life cycle, including spent fuel management, security and nonproliferation, and also medical radionuclide production and other applications for nuclear energy. He has led the development of the blockchain proof of concept since 2019. And then our second speaker is Veronica Venturini, and she is the Computer Security Information and Communications Tech Management expert at the Argentine National Atomic Energy Commission, CNEA. And she's been at CNEA for 10 years, working on user machine interfaces for nuclear control room systems and human factor engineering. And she is responsible for blockchain tech in the information security department. So with that said, I'd like to first get started with Alan to share his presentation with us. So please take the floor, Alan.
Thank you very much, Lovely, and I hope everyone can hear me okay and it's coming through okay. I'm just going to share my screen with my presentation. With a bit of luck, everyone will start seeing that in just a moment. That's great. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for the opportunity to talk to you today about the project that NNL has been working on putting together and delivering as part of a BEIS-funded, so that's the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy in the UK, project around the advanced fuel cycles. That's the advanced nuclear fuel cycle for energy applications. And we've been looking at a blockchain project for data integrity and assurance of modeling data within the nuclear sector. So Just a bit about the National Nuclear Laboratory in the UK first. We are the UK's National Nuclear Laboratory for Fission Technology. We're owned by the UK government and we have 3 key roles given to us by government. We are a UK technical advisor, we deliver national strategic technical work, and we're also a commercial business delivering work for customers across the UK and the world. We operate a range of world-leading facilities to deliver nuclear science and technology that underpins the UK nuclear fuel cycle. And one of the unique aspects of our operation is that we reinvest any profits we make each year in further research and development that we think is beneficial to the UK nuclear sector and the global nuclear sector. And we consist of around 1,000 people with well over 450 dedicated scientists within that. So a bit more about the project that I want to talk to you about today. We started out with the question maybe a couple of years ago of how can we improve confidence and assurance for the data we're using without compromising the security and commercial protections or adding onerous steps for the users. And this came out of a few events that we observed happening within the laboratory and within the work that we were delivering, where maybe things hadn't quite gone through the full quality assurance processes, or had been prepared for one purpose and were being used for a slightly different purpose. And it was requiring a lot of digging around to ascertain the status of the verification of that data before we could use it for a new purpose. And this comes back to the fact that within the nuclear sector, we tend to end up building computational models that are layers upon layers of different data, different techniques, different disciplines that come together to produce our final output and our final result for the customer that maybe tells them how their plant is expected to operate in a certain scenario. And that data moving between the models is moving between different teams, potentially different organizations, and the trail of information that sits behind that could be stored across multiple locations within the whole sector. So we started to look at whether blockchain could be a way to help us improve the processes around this. And we did an assessment alongside an organisation in the UK that looked at the needs of what we were looking at. And we believed there were 5 key needs of what we're looking for. It's around auditability, security and access, allowing for version control information, allowing for data sharing and storage, and allowing for interoperability. And from that, we've taken away the idea and further developed it into a proof of concept. Before I give you the demonstration of the proof of concept, I just want to talk to you about why we believe blockchain is valuable for this this purpose. And many of you will be familiar with the difference between distributed ledger technologies and blockchain and cryptocurrencies. For us, it's the combination of the distributed ledger with the cryptography layered across the top that allows us to have that assurance through the distributed nature of the network, whilst having the cryptography to protect any commercial IP in the data that may be transmitted. I'm going to give you dive straight into a demonstration of what we've developed that will last around 9 minutes or so and go through some of the different functionality that is built into the proof of concept system that we've currently got that tries to demonstrate how the blockchain can be built to serve the application. I'd highlight before we do this that the purpose of this R&D project was to focus on the blockchain underneath. So we spent a lot of time thinking about the building of smart contracts and all of the sort of technical gubbins to ensure that we have a really flexible architecture on top that lots of organizations can connect into.
This video is a demo of the NNL blockchain proof of concept. The blockchain acts as a critical ledger of our documented data, showing a history of its use and any changes. I'm going to walk you through the system today, specifically how to add, view, link, and verify documents onto the blockchain, edit user permissions and profiles, and deprecate documents. When I talk about documents today, A document can be any item on a computer, meaning the blockchain is incredibly flexible. Let's start by adding a document. I'll begin by unticking this search by hash function. Then find one of the documents I want to upload. I'm adding the data export file, which I'll highlight and click Open. This creates the document hash, a unique fingerprint of the document stored on the blockchain. After entering the file name and where it's stored, I click Register Document, and after a short time whizzing away, the document is registered. When we view a document, what we see next depends on our blockchain permission level. For example, with full permissions, I can see all information is decrypted: the organization, file name and location, and the verification and links. If I take a copy of the hash and use it to search as a user where I have no permissions, only the organization, file name, and location shows on the screen. Verification and link data stays encrypted. So, let's look at how to edit the permissions by file and user. Here, the interface gives us quite granular control of those permissions. I'm going to start by giving permission to Ben for a single document. Now, in order for the blockchain to provide a full history of each document, we need to link our documents together. To do so, I'll begin by opening one of the documents I want to link. Here it is, decrypted and ready. First of all, I need to create a group of documents. A group is a set of documents that exist at the same point in a workflow. Effectively, they are parallel. I'm going to name the group and then browse for another file that's going into that group. I'm using the data export bin file here. Now I want to make sure all of these documents link back to a previous document. And to do that, I'm going to add in some references. All of these documents are built from the input file 001 FP1147, which in this case is a model input document. So I'll now create the links for each of them. You'll notice that the links work whether the document is encrypted or not. So even though I can't always see the full data, I can still navigate the system. Hit Save, and all of my changes are now processed onto the chain in the background. Next, let's take a look at user competencies. I'll use my profile for this example. Enter in a competency and today's date, and hit Save. We can now see that competency has been added. This can be used to demonstrate SQEPness for users in the next stage of managing a document. So, let's add a verification. I'm inputting the words reviewed input file here, then clicking Verify before saving again. While that's processing, I'm going to look at changing the authors. I'm making myself an author and calling it version 1.0. Let's save those changes. Again, it takes a few moments to process and for the file to decrypt itself. So now I can see the author, versions, where it's stored, the different file references, and verification history. Now this isn't the file I want to work on, so I'm just going to search for another document. OK, so I've found my file and can see some information there, but it's not going to decrypt in full. I can see that a user called Alan Simpson has verified the file at some point, but I can't see what he has said. I can see the version number is 1.0 and my name is its author, but I can't see where the file is stored. I can't see the description or any details about the other files. And while I can navigate through to those files, Again, I have limited visibility of any information about each one. The blockchain is configured to allow detailed control over what users in my organization and other organizations see. This can all be set to configure itself according to set rules, depending on the interface I build to interact with my blockchain that suits my organization's workflow. Now we're going to make verifications to a whole group. So I'm adding the verification I want to apply and then saving the changes. We'll notice now the verification gets applied at a document level to each one in the group. Looking down the screen, we can see the verification here and who applied it. Remember, whenever we save data on the blockchain, it's copied to multiple endpoints. All endpoints receive the changes, including any customers tied to a project, meaning that all changes made can be tracked and assured independently by customers or other organizations. So let's now switch views to look at what our customers see and grant any permissions they need. Here, our customer can see the authors and the version. They can't see the description, the location, or the references. They can see that it's been verified, but not the detail behind the verification. So let's give them some permissions to view more information about what's happened to this document. I'm going to edit the permissions for this user here. I want them to have the ability to view the file name and the description. I don't need them to see the location, as it's not important for them. They can view the assumptions and the verifications. They won't need to edit the authors or the links. They don't need to over-edit the version or deprecate the document, and they don't need permissions to edit the document. So let's give them those views and save the changes. If I go back in again as if I was the customer, I can now see the permitted information. Here is the data about the author, and I can see that Alan Simpson has the ability to check FISPIN inputs, which is good because it means that he is competent to check the information that I've got. I can also traverse my way up through these references and see what's happened further up the chain, but I can't see any other file data. Finally, let's look at the process of deprecating a document. When I deprecate a document, it's a non-reversible change. I won't be able to edit the document again. This possibly indicates that there's a newer version of the document that's been added into the system, or that there was an issue with the document from before. However, I can see and access any links to the deprecated document because the data on a blockchain is an immutable record of what has happened. So, that completes the blockchain proof of concept demo. Thank you for watching.
Okay,
This video.
there we go. So hopefully from that demonstration, you've seen how the blockchain that we've built underneath has lots of configured actions and smart contracts within it to allow the assurance of data across the system, whilst enabling ultimately organizations to build their own workflows around that, store their own data in it, and protect the data they own. So the point of this project is about increasing trust and confidence in modeling data, would allow it to be relied on in more critical scenario. It then provides an opportunity to reduce overall rework, increase efficiency, and assure appropriate application of models in context. If we look at this workflow here, we can see that if an author creates an item and works with a verifier to review that item, they can then send that verified item to the customer, but they can also add a fingerprint of the item to the blockchain, and they can interrogate the blockchain to confirm the item verification. One of the key features of the blockchain proof of concept as developed is that we have actually structured it with 3 layers. We've got the blockchain based on the Ethereum platform underneath. we've got an API system that sits across the top, and then we've got different interfaces that can be built by different organizations to suit their purposes. So whilst the interface you saw today was maybe what you call rough and ready, it demonstrated a lot of the fundamental applications of the blockchain and how the blockchain works. What we envisage is that different organizations would build document or item management applications to suit their workflow, however they operate in their organization, that would hook into the APIs in the background to make use of the blockchain, making it a flexible solution for multiple organizations. And that's where we've got to. So we're currently looking at further use cases for this and understanding more about the use cases, and looking to understand which organizations are interested in coming together and maybe further developing this concept into something that has multiple applications for the nuclear sector, both in the UK and worldwide. And with that, I will pass back to Lovely.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Alan. I actually have a lot of questions, and I want to delve into some of the details in your presentation. But before doing so, I'd actually like to pass on the mic to Veronica first, so she can share her project with us. And then from there, we'll go to Q&A. So please, Veronica, it's your turn.
Thank you, Lovely. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
The presentation is on?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Thanks to the organizers for putting on this great event and for promote DLT in nuclear industry. Before we begin, let me introduce myself briefly. I'm Veronica Venturini, and I work at the Information Security Department from the Argentinian National Atomic Energy Commission. And today I'm going to talk about the external dosimeter system blockchain prototype. Let me talk a little bit about the agency capabilities. The Argentinian Atomic Energy Agency is a decentralized scientific technological organization with multiple fields of application, which meet the quality and safety standard, national and international standards, and with several facilities around the country. It's a huge country. And especially at the Information Security Department, we are responsible of cybersecurity policies and procedures. We make awareness and training program. And also we are accountant for security incident management. And recently we began with DLT. In this way, last year we present our NMAC blockchain prototype in IAEA conference in nuclear security. So, move on, the external dosimeter system. The work we have done include looking at how DLT could improve existing solutions, our existing solutions. External dosimeter system consists of software in which the measurement of the dosimeters sent to different facilities are recorded. From time to time, for example, once a month, those dosimeters are returned to the agency, and in the laboratory, the technicians make the reports to the facility, and the same report is sent to the regulator. In this sense, the aim of this project is improve current external dosimeter system applying DLT. We call SISTE this system. The main function of the system is dosimeter track and dose measurement traceability. Sometimes the facilities lose dosimeters and it is difficult to track them. We are convinced that blockchain is the tool to strengthen nuclear security in all aspects, and particularly in any process. In this end, there are the process of our external dosimeter system. First of all, each facility around the country must ship its dosimeters to CONEA laboratory in Buenos Aires. Then the technicians analyze dosimeter values in this laboratory in order to detect deviation from limits. And finally, technicians write each report to send it to regulator, who must approve or reject this report. We encountered some disadvantages. First, delays in reporting. Second, the operator couldn't be notified in time concerning with those measurements. And finally, regulators couldn't access to the system and they miss operation due traceability. Here you can see a screenshot of the current system. The system is in production. There is the dosimeter request form where you could choose the type of dosimeter and then write the amount of dosimeter type. So, stakeholders can write or read blockchain information depending on authentication access using different communication channels. That allows preserving privacy operator information. For example, the facility head could write dosimeter request. The laboratory technician can write down the values of the dosimeters, while the head of radiation protection could monitor the delivery of dosimeters. And obviously the radioactivity values of this, the group of operators. In addition, the governmental regulatory entities verify that parameters are below limits that each person can receive. And also the information is available to the medical service of each facility. As a private blockchain, we could choose save data or save only the hash of that data. So, how DLT could improve the system? Technically, each peer, each node in the network has got an identical copy of database. If someone wants to attack the data center of the facility, the other nodes detect the instruction and don't allow that transaction to be recorded on the blockchain. At this point, it is necessary to explain that no data can be deleted from this type of data structure. So, what are the advantages of using DLT? First, traceability available to each actor. Second, guaranteed data integrity, a single source to trust, and accelerating data access. Here you can see our blockchain architecture. We work over a Hyperledger fabric. We just have developed our blockchain architecture with our smart contracts and the ledger. And SISTE is in production running on an Apache server. And we are focused on developing the API with Node.js. This is our currently work. And as future challenges, we think that it's important, or we need to discuss new features with regulator. The regulator would approve DLT use. It must trust in this technology. Our regulator decide if we could or couldn't use the tools in every sector of CONEA. And second, we need to build an ecosystem by combining the different facilities throughout the country to participate. And technically, we want to see SysDev running in our clusters. Finally, let me summarize briefly what are the benefits of DLT introduction. First, we will improve existing solutions. Second, we can prove that certain processes are carried out at the right time by the right people. Third, we solve issues around data manipulation, increasing trust and integrity. And fourth, and finally, the regulator can review those information and the operator could access them also. Thank you very much, Lovely. And I have to share out.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Veronica. So to our audience, we've just seen two very different use cases here. The first, in Alan's case, is streamlining and tracking the documentation related to computational models relevant to facility operations. And for CNEA, as described by Veronica, it's really about sharing radiation readings or dosimetry information to the regulator. And a gentle reminder that if you have any questions, please put it on the chat so that we can share them to our panelists. But for now, I have my own set of questions, and I'd like to turn to Veronica first, if that's all right. So I think you make a really compelling point about how a missing or late dosimeter reading can create gaps in the data that not only complicate the relationship between a facility and a regulator, but it also can compromise the safety and security of a given facility. So my first question is actually a clarifying question. In the current system, without using sort of a blockchain interface, how long does the entire dosimetry reading or reporting process take from when the facility sends it and it gets logged in the system and evaluated by the regulator? Can you just clarify that process for us? I think you're muted.
Sorry.
Okay.
The current process takes around five days. Also, if the people lose the dosimeters, they must to send the dosimeters in the last month. I think that a centralized database on a server in our institution, no matter how many security barriers we may have, sorry, is still a possible point of attack. If each member have an identical copy of database, we will increase one more security barriers, and this is the blockchain fundamentals. Obviously, adding to cryptographic concept, but we are focused on security, information security.
And so with the proposed sort of blockchain integration, what is sort of your hypothesis of what exactly will be improved? So what I'm hearing is it's really about improving that interaction with the regulator, correct?
Yes, it is. What we actually achieve with this system is to involve the regulator during the complete dosimeter traceability process. Currently, the regulator interviews only at the end of the process when it receives the dosimeter report. And just to be clear, this report is sent in paper or sometime, anytime in PDF format. There isn't a digitalized process.
I see. So that is like part of the benefit is moving away from a paper-based model to a digitized one where all of the relevant stakeholders have access to it. And hopefully that level of transparency will improve the relationship. I guess, you mentioned during your presentation that part of your next steps, because this prototype, you're still in the beginning stages of this. There isn't quite a proof of concept yet that you can demo, but part of your next steps is to build an ecosystem with different parties that can participate on it. Can you talk a little bit about this ecosystem? Like, how many facilities would you want to engage, and what do you think are the opportunities and challenges in getting them on board?
Okay. Just now we have around 45 facilities, of which 5 entities are external entities, such as the Oxitex, who is responsible for the fuel element of our plants, and, for example, the radiotherapy services from Frofo Institute. We still don't know what strategy we are going to use, but it will be interesting if some of these institutions contribute with resource. At the beginning, the ecosystem will be made up of different divisions of our agency and the regulator, of course.
Okay, great. Thank you. I want to turn to Alan, if that's all right. I think you laid out a very fascinating use case. And when I was watching your presentation, what comes to mind is an appreciation of scale, in terms of how many people in your case may be layering updates and assumptions to a given computational model, and then kind of thinking about the long span of time when you think about the longevity of a given facility. And so one sort of basic question I have for you is trying to better understand the stakes here. So how often do modeling errors or mishaps occur? And sort of what does the worst case scenario look like when the data is not organized? Hopefully that question makes sense.
It absolutely does, and it's a great question. I think we have to work on the principle that the nuclear industry hasn't been built up with computational modeling available day to day in what it does. It's made use of computational modeling from the very beginning, but it hasn't been fundamental to what we've done. And so therefore, many of the processes that currently exist assume that this modeling may not be correct. And so we use defense in depth, and we do multiple checking and lots of layers of work. And actually, as a result of that intense work to ensure the validity of the models, we very rarely have any errors get through that affect the operation of the plant. To my knowledge, there's never been a case where the results of a model have erroneously caused the operation of the the plant to go out of regulatory parameters. But the organizational cost of managing all of that and dealing with all of that and making sure that the data itself is accurate is quite high. And we think the sort of benefit of this solution is that it is twofold. It would allow us to, over time, reduce the amount of rechecking of work that we'd maybe doing at each of those layers, checking all the data that's coming through, spending less time on that, making sure the skilled, highly qualified people that are doing these models are spending their time focused on the models rather than just checking lines of data coming into a system. But also from a kind of customer and regulator point of view, at the moment they have to place their trust in the skilled organizations to deliver this data. And if they wanted to have insight into what's happened in the different layers of that model, they would have to build up their own models themselves, and they wouldn't be able to get that insight. So by making the modeling process more transparent, we believe we'll get more trust. And through increasing trust, we can maybe make regulators happier to use computational modeling for more significant purposes and not layer some of the other checks and balances that are currently put in during operations.
Yeah, that makes sense. And actually, one of the compelling aspects of that demo is the deprecation, the section where once it's updated, you can't, work on it, and then you get a log of, or basically a record of when it was updated and so forth if you have access to it. So I thought that that was really interesting. Um, one of the questions that come up for a lot of people who are new to this technology is what exactly is stored on the blockchain? Is it the modeling data itself, or is it some other relevant data, metadata? Can you just walk us through that for your proof of concept?
Yeah, so that's something that we spent a lot of time debating back and forth as to what was appropriate to store on the blockchain and what was not. And those of you that are more familiar with blockchains will know that we don't want to store too much data on the blockchain because it slows down the performance of the blockchain. So what we just store is metadata related to the items or documents. So the key metadata we store is who is the owner of that document, what is the organization that created that document, information about those verifications, that verification history that we talked about, the links of that document to maybe other documents and some information about descriptions, and most importantly, a hash of that document, so a unique fingerprint of the document at that time. We do not transmit the data itself. Processes, be that encrypted email or shared file systems, to transmit the data from where it is to where it needs to go. And then what we do is we allow the receiver of that data to validate their data against the blockchain. So they take the file, they load it into the blockchain, and they check the consistency of the file they've received using the hash that the blockchain stores. And so from a organization's point of view, there is fundamental protection around the IP that they may be loading into the blockchain. Not only have we got the cryptographic layers that's securing some of the data, is actually we're avoiding putting some of the data that is IP sensitive onto the blockchain in the first place.
I see, I see. And then one point of clarification for me, I was listening to the first session earlier, and there were a few points and questions about centralization. In this case, because there is a larger sort of institution involved that's supposed to do inspections, or sort of where the buck stops, so to speak. And for your proof of concept, it seems like because it is within the facility, the stakeholders are sort of horizontal, and there isn't really a top-down approach. Is that a correct understanding of sort of the mapping of the stakeholders? Because what I imagine, or what comes to mind, are different facility operators, or that are trying to sort of update the model itself. It doesn't necessarily have to go to um, another sort of stakeholder to be approved. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I suppose one of the things that solution is interesting for is the kind of use case and the value of this system is different for different stakeholders. So maybe in reduced work, it may be in increased transparency. And the way it can be used is sometimes a verification of information is done within an organization and we're just transmitting information about what's being done. Sometimes the verification of that information is being done by an independent organization authority. Well, are enabling anyone that is making use of this system to find a benefit, whether that be in reduced costs, increased insight into what's happening within the sector, the kind of security of knowing that the IP is protected whilst rather than being transmitted between organisations. All of those sorts of things, hopefully everyone finds a benefit.
Okay, great. Thank you for that. Again, just checking in with audience members. If you have any questions, please plug them in the chat. I'd like to transition to some questions for both Alan and Veronica in the meantime, as we await any questions from the viewers here. So one of the other sort of themes, so to speak, when talking about blockchain for the first time is having the relevant stakeholders that you want to work with, whether it may be within the facility or the regulator, in CNEA's case, is building trust with them such that they would actually use this technology. So what do you think are the barriers to trust, and how can we address them, that is for your specific use cases? So either one of you can go first.
Okay. The biggest problem we encounter is cultural. We need to digitalize the process. I think that the pandemic helped us a lot, but we need to work hard. In our country, the software used by the facility must be previously verified and approved by the regulator. It is necessary to involve the regulator from the design. The regulator will surely define some issues, and it will also be able to see the benefits of the new dosimeter monitoring functionality. And finding out in real time what is actually happening on each facility around the country. And we were able to digitalize many processes, and we need more resources for it.
So I think for the system we've developed, the barriers to people trusting it are, for us, I think there is going to be a real organizational barrier with what data is contained on that chain, and what data they may be releasing to other parties, and also what they may be revealing to other parties about maybe where mistakes are happening. And we're not always perfect. Mistakes will always happen. But as organizations, we try to protect that a lot, and we don't necessarily want our external stakeholders to see that we make mistakes. So I think there's a confidence on two aspects here. There's the technical confidence that we are trying to mitigate through the work we've done on what data is stored on chain and the cryptography that we've applied to that. But there's also the human element of the fact that these organizations want to project that the perfect performance of their organization, and sometimes putting into a more public sphere the fact that we've had to update a model because there was an incorrect bit of information in it, you know, people may see that we're updating models a lot of the time and become suspicious. I think that's a confidence barrier that can be overcome. I think one of the benefits of the nuclear sector is that it's highly collaborative, and that organisations are willing to be open and honest with each other about their performance and working to improve and do the right thing.
Great. And actually, a question from an audience member just came up, and it's for Alan. The question is, when a legitimate end user accesses a document and changes a document, does the hashtag change? And how are other users made aware of that change?
It does. That's the great thing about MD5 hashes for fingerprints. The moment that document is changed, saved, updated, it will be a new hash, and therefore, when other users take the document and check it against the chain, they'll have a failure come up. They won't be able to find that document on the chain, and depending on how the interface is designed around that, they'll possibly get some guidance on what is done. What hasn't been designed in our proof of concept at the moment is any algorithms for traversing the chain, for finding files by any other way than that fingerprint, and that is something that we know would need to develop for a production system.
Great. And I have a question for both of you. So from your presentations, you are using different DLT software platforms. For CNEA, I think I heard Hyperledger Fabric, and for NNL, it's Ethereum based. Can you just talk through why you chose that for your specific use case? And this is really for the benefit of those audience members who might be curious as to how one would find like the right sort of partner or right features or specifications for a given situation. Veronica, do you want to go?
I'm happy to take this one.
You first.
Okay, so in our case, we selected Ethereum majoritarily because it allowed us to rapidly prototype the system. We had a very compressed timescale in which we wanted to develop this, and the good thing about Ethereum is that it has a number of toolkits that hook into it and allow for rapid development of the smart contracts technology. So that was our main driver. We believe there are also benefits in the open source nature of Ethereum. It's fairly well developed, being promoted by some big organizations, namely Microsoft. A lot of our system is prototyped using some of the Microsoft systems to allow for that rapid prototyping. I'd probably emphasize that the purpose of what we've developed to date is about demonstrating the theory behind implementing the smart contracts in this way, and we'd probably actually go and review at the production point whether Ethereum is still the best technology for our purpose.
Great, thank you. Veronica?
In our case, we adopt Hyperledger Fabric because it is possible to build private architectures where we store data, not only hashes, and we ensure security information using different channels to access them. And as Sarah said in previous sessions, scalability of Hyperledger Fabric is the best feature. In other way, at the end of this year, Argentina is going to approve the national blockchain strategy. On this basis, regulation on data privacy and type of blockchain to be used will surely be addressed. We are waiting for the regulations.
Great, thank you. And then just to sort of take a step back and look at this from a national perspective, if you will, in the past several years, we've seen sort of governments think about developing like countrywide strategies or approaches to blockchain technologies, primarily to protect sort of businesses, mitigate risks, because there isn't a lot of regulation around it yet. And this is mostly to address the growth, the exponential growth when it comes to the use of digital currency. But I was just curious whether that has implications to what we're discussing today. So I know Veronica and I talked about the upcoming Argentina national blockchain strategy. I'm not sure if the UK has something similar, but is that impacting your work at all? Or is something that you think we as a nuclear security, as a nuclear community should think about as we test the waters with this technology for our purposes? Veronica, because I know that you have you mentioned the national strategy for Argentina. Would you want to take a crack at that?
I think that we need to promote blockchain and show the benefits. But first of all, we need to teach, to train the technology information divisions in public organisms. Maybe in few years, presently we can see the results. This is a project that maybe take 10 years for us. We are a lot, I said before, the people use paper today, and it is a very great change and challenge, of course.
Great. Alan, is this question relevant to you, or?
Yeah, I think in the UK and for our application, the most important thing is actually having a coalition of the willing, as I describe it. And so I think your later point there, Lovely, about the sector recognising and building its strategy is most appropriate. And I think that's what we're seeing happening in the UK. So whilst there's no overarching national strategy, to my knowledge, in the UK, I think what we're seeing is different sectors where there are different major uses for blockchain are developing strategies and standards that suit their requirements. And that's how I see the needs of blockchain in the nuclear sector going as well. Is I think some of our applications are unique, not all of them, and there's a lot to be learned from other sectors and bringing in knowledge from other sectors. But the strategy and what we're aiming to do with it and what we're aiming to achieve with it, I think, is something that a coalition of the willing within the sector is best placed to deliver.
Great. I know that we're winding down a bit here, and I don't think there are any additional questions from the viewers. So I'd like to ask you two very basic questions to just end our time here. From my understanding, you are both not blockchain developers. You've become maybe experts along the way. So I'm just curious, how did you learn about blockchain? Was that learning curve difficult for you? And what were some of the resources that worked to get you more comfortable with the language and the processes in this technology?
Shall I take that one first?
Sure. Yeah.
I think in my case, I'm lucky enough to have a bit of a background in IT before my current role. But actually, the key instigator for me was one conversation with one person that knew about blockchain and just talking about what I was doing day to day and some of the challenges. And it was he that brought up this idea. And it's through conversations with various people since and talking about the application and the idea and investigating it that has really helped elucidate this idea, test that blockchain helps it, and take us forward to proof of concept. So I think the most important thing for me in terms of how we develop this further is the opportunity to have those conversations, have those open-ended conversations about the problems we have, and the confidence in that this is a valid application has probably come from the fact that in every conversation I've talked to people about this, we've had that same conversation of, if blockchain doesn't help this, we know that we should stop going down this route and look at other routes to solve the problem. And starting out with that open and honest thing builds a great deal of trust in those conversations that we have.
Great, great. Thank you. Veronica?
In my case, I learned from online courses, but it was very struggling for me. It took me over a year to be capable of dominate the technology. I think that the problem almost in Argentina is that everybody is developing Ethereum blockchain, and I chose a different technology. And the advantage was that Linux Foundation have very useful documentation, and the code is free code.
Great. And I guess last question. In any worthwhile experiment or prototype, there's always going to be risks and concerns. What is that for you at the moment?
I think for me, it's the whether we can communicate the concept of what we're going for and why we think it's useful to a wide enough audience that the other people within the sector can see and hopefully recognize the same problem, the same challenges, and make that link of how this solution could help them. If we don't manage to achieve that and demonstrate and build some more use cases for our system and how people could hook into it, then I don't believe we'll be able to take it forward into a more developed system.
Oh, it sounds like Veronica didn't hear my last question. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I'll just repeat it. I'm just basically asking about risks or concerns as you are undergoing this trial for CNEA. I know that you're barely starting out, and it could be maybe engaging stakeholders or trying to build that cluster that you were talking about. But yeah, just curious what some of the challenges are for you moving forward.
The main risk currently are the learning curve that new members of the team must go through, and the resistance to change that the regulator may put forth. Let's keep in mind that the solution just exists and works correctly, and this is our first problem.
Great, thank you. I think if there aren't any more questions, I'm happy to close the panel and give back everyone's time. I think that's 9 minutes of your time. If questions from the viewers emerge in an hour or tomorrow or a few weeks later, we are more than happy to hear from you and connect you with the panelists. And please tune in tomorrow for the second day of Hashing the Atom, sessions 3 and 4. And finally, on behalf of the Stimson Center and the audience tuning in from all different countries and time zones, thank you to Alan and Veronica for sharing your ideas and expertise with us. We look forward to seeing how these prototypes unfold. And I really hope that this event connects you with other folks in the nuclear community, nuclear security community, to support your endeavors, provide constructive feedback, and just start building more knowledge around this technology. So with that, thank you so much, and see you tomorrow. Take care.